The legend claims a handful of frontiersmen held off a massive professional army for 13 days to buy time for Texas. This is the textbook myth. In reality, the Alamo was a strategically worthless death trap. Its defenders died not to delay the enemy, but because of a catastrophic failure in command. Why were 200 men left to be butchered in a crumbling Spanish mission? Today, we tear down the legend to reveal the dark, tactical reality of the Alamo. Report for duty with a like and subscribe for next week's grand assault. The year was 1836. The Mexican Republic was fracturing under the weight of political purges. In the northern province of Texas, American colonists and Tejano residents had driven out federal troops. They believed the war was paused. They believed they had time to organize. They were entirely wrong. General Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna was already marching north with a punitive expedition. He led an army of thousands, modeled strictly on Napoleonic principles. His veterans had just ruthlessly crushed a rebellion in Zacatecas. His objective in Texas was total, uncompromising pacification.
Forward march!
San Antonio de Bexar sat directly in his path. Just outside the town stood the Alamo. It was not a fortress. It was a ruined, unroofed 18th century religious mission. It had no modern defensive redoubts. It had no interlocking fields of crossfire. Its walls were crumbling adobe, barely thick enough to stop a musket ball. The compound was sprawling and entirely flat. For a small garrison, it was nothing but a tomb. The Texian commander, General Sam Houston, recognized the immediate danger. He understood the lethal reality of static defense. He sent explicit orders to strip the Alamo of its artillery, remove the supplies, and blow up the walls. The mission was completely isolated. It sat on the far edge of the frontier, miles away from any reliable supply lines. But the men inside refused to leave. Colonel James Bowie and Lieutenant Colonel William Barrett Travis shared a fractured, tense command. They were proud, stubborn, and deeply convinced of their own invincibility. They believed Santa Anna would not attempt a winter crossing of the desolate northern deserts. This catastrophic assumption doomed them. They fundamentally ignored the mathematics of siege warfare. The Alamo's outer perimeter was nearly a quarter-mile long. A standard military calculation of the era required at least 1,000 men to properly defend a wall of that massive size. Travis and Bowie had barely 150 effectives. The defenders were stretched incredibly thin across the timber palisades and stone walls. There were massive blind spots. One single breach would end everything. On February 23rd, the horizon turned blue with Mexican uniforms. Santa Anna had arrived weeks earlier than anyone thought humanly possible. He had force-marched his army through brutal winter blizzards and knee-deep mud. His men were exhausted, freezing, and hungry. Yet they possessed overwhelming numerical and logistical superiority. Santa Anna wasted no time with diplomacy. He ordered a blood-red flag hoisted over the San Fernando church in town. It signaled absolute destruction. It meant no quarter would be given. Surrender was officially no longer an option. The trap was permanently sprung. For 13 grueling days, the siege ground down the trapped defenders. This was not a period of glorious cinematic combat. It was a cold, miserable, and mechanical war of attrition. Mexican artillery systematically dismantled the Alamo's physical defenses. Cannons fired solid iron shots into the brittle adobe walls hour after hour. The kinetic impact shattered the dry earth. Entire sections of the perimeter began to crumble under the relentless mathematical pressure. Inside the compound, the human logistics completely collapsed. The defenders had virtually no provisions. Water was drawn from a shallow, exposed well. Sleep became a biological impossibility. Santa Anna ordered his artillery to fire at irregular, unpredictable intervals throughout the cold nights. The psychological pressure was immense. Men hallucinated from extreme exhaustion. The sheer, repetitive noise fractured their nerves. The Texians possessed a distinct weapon advantage in individual accuracy. Many carried long-barreled Kentucky and Tennessee rifles. These weapons used spiraled grooves inside the barrel to impart a tight spin on the lead ball. This spin allowed them to strike targets accurately at 200 yards. The Mexican infantry carried smoothbore Brown Bess muskets. These British-made surplus weapons lacked rifling and were wildly inaccurate beyond 70 yards. However, the American rifle had a fatal tactical flaw. It was incredibly slow to reload. A rifleman had to wrap his lead ball in a greased cloth patch. He then had to physically ram it down the tight, heavily fouled barrel. A highly trained Mexican infantryman could load and fire his smoothbore musket 3 or 4 times in that same duration. The Texian rifles were perfect for long-range frontier skirmishes. They were disastrous for repelling a massed high-speed infantry assault. Furthermore, the Mexican army was not a disorganized, chaotic mob. They were highly organized into professional, dense infantry columns. Santa Anna understood the geometry of the Alamo perfectly. He knew the massive perimeter was impossible for the exhausted Texians to defend equally. He systematically probed the walls, looking for the weakest structural points. He heavily concentrated his artillery on the fragile north wall. The adobe cracked open. The wooden timber splintered. The physical gap widened every single day. The defenders frantically repaired the damage with dirt and scavenged timber under the cover of darkness. The sheer physical strain was rapidly breaking the Texian garrison. How do you evaluate this commander's decision to stay trapped inside the mission? By March 5th, Santa Anna had silently positioned his elite assault columns. He abruptly halted the artillery bombardment at dusk. The sudden silence was a calculated tactical weapon. The exhausted Texians, finally relieved of the deafening noise, fell into a deep, desperate sleep. It was a fatal slumber. The Mexican columns moved into their jumping-off positions in the freezing pitch dark. They carried heavy scaling ladders, axes, and iron crowbars. They wore no bulky overcoats to avoid snagging on the wooden defenses. They were ordered to maintain strict, deadly silence. At 5:30 a.m. on March 6th, the silence completely shattered. A single Mexican soldier yelled, "Viva Santa Anna!" The massive cry rippled through the freezing morning air. The military buglers immediately sounded the degüello. This ancient Spanish cavalry call meant slit throat. It promised that no prisoners would be taken alive. 4 massive Mexican columns rushed the walls simultaneously. They emerged from the dark like a terrifying, unstoppable tidal wave. The Texian sentries barely had time to shout a panicked warning. The defenders scrambled wildly from their blankets. They rushed blindly to the firing steps. The tactical mechanics of the assault immediately favored the heavy numbers of the attackers. The front ranks of the Mexican soldiers absorbed the first brutal volley of rifle fire. Dozens of men fell dead in the dirt. But the massed formation kept moving aggressively forward. The physical momentum was unstoppable. The Texians fired their preloaded rifles and double-barreled shotguns. They simply did not have the time to reload. They grabbed heavy pistols. Then they grabbed hunting knives. Then they used their empty, heavy rifles as blunt clubs. The north wall was the first critical point to fail. Travis rushed to the collapsing breach with a shotgun. A Mexican musket ball struck him squarely in the head. He died instantly, tumbling down the dirt ramp. The entire Texian command structure evaporated in seconds. Mexican troops jammed their wooden scaling ladders against the ruined adobe. The ladders were dangerously short. The desperate soldiers climbed directly onto the shoulders of their fallen comrades. They clawed their way violently over the stone parapets. The sheer density of the Mexican infantry overwhelmed the scattered, exhausted defenders. The physical pressure of the mass physically displaced the Texians from the outer walls. The entire perimeter collapsed inward. The remaining Texians retreated frantically into the long barrack and the ruined stone chapel. These were dark, windowless stone buildings filled with defensive trenches. The battle immediately transformed from a siege into a brutal, close-quarters purge. Mexican infantry blasted the heavy wooden doors off their hinges with captured Texian cannons. They fired blindly into the dark, smoke-filled rooms. The smoothbore muskets functioned perfectly at point-blank range. The heavy lead balls pulverized bone and shattered the timber barricades. Bayonets finished the brutal work in the dark. The air filled with blinding, choking black powder smoke. The screaming of dying men was deafening. Jim Bowie was slaughtered mercilessly in his cot. He was severely ill and completely unable to stand. The final pocket of desperate resistance gathered in the stone chapel, They were systematically and violently annihilated by overwhelming numbers. It took less than 90 minutes to kill almost every combatant. Then came the darkest historical chapter, the one frequently scrubbed from romanticized textbook history. The organized fighting ceased, but the deliberate killing did not. Between 5 and 7 exhausted Texians had surrendered or been captured alive in the smoke. Among them, according to multiple eyewitness Mexican military accounts, was the famous frontiersman David Crockett. They were forcefully brought before Santa Anna in the blood-soaked courtyard.
Silence!
His previous orders had been absolute and unforgiving. He ordered their immediate, violent execution. Several ambitious Mexican officers stepped forward and hacked the unarmed prisoners to death with heavy cavalry swords. There was no glorious, defiant last stand for the final survivors. There was only a cold, mechanical, and deeply political execution. The Alamo had permanently fallen. By 7 a.m., the dusty courtyard was a horrific, silent graveyard. Santa Anna coldly ordered the bodies of the defenders stacked in alternating layers with dry wood. They were set on fire in massive pyres. The thick, greasy smoke drifted heavily over the Texas plains for days. The Mexican general truly believed he had completely crushed the armed rebellion. He viewed the massacre as a highly effective, necessary psychological weapon. He fully intended to terrorize the remaining American colonists into immediate submission. Instead, he committed a massive, catastrophic strategic blunder. The brutal execution of the entire garrison did not break the Texian will to fight. It powerfully galvanized it. The Alamo instantly became a terrifying battle cry. It transformed a chaotic, unorganized frontier rebellion into a ruthless, holy war of vengeance. Exactly 6 weeks later, Sam Houston's reorganized army would scream, "Remember the Alamo," as they completely shattered Santa Anna's forces at the Battle of San Jacinto. The tactical reality of the Alamo was an unmitigated disaster. It was a profound failure of intelligence, supply logistics, and command ego. Over 200 men were needlessly sacrificed for a ruined, indefensible courtyard. But human history rarely remembers the cold logistics of a military defeat. It remembers the intoxicating power of the myth. The physical annihilation of the garrison secured their eternal, untouchable cultural victory. The blood soaked deeply into the adobe, leaving a political stain that would outlast entire empires. Which historical battle should we break down in our next video?